Welcome to our high-tech conference. I've been told to ensure everybody's got their earphones on, they're all green, and the volume is turned up. So welcome to this session. It's called Building Resilient Provider Collaborations, and I'm delighted that we've got two really good speakers to take us through this session. Firstly, I'd like to introduce Christian Dingwall, who's a partner at Browne Jacobson. Christian has done a lot of work and is very close to the legislation around provider collaborations. And Christian's going to take us through the emerging new landscape with ICSs, provider collaborations and place, and then really sort of focus on what are the advantages of provider collaborations and how we can use the legislation to really push their work forward. He'll also talk about some of the downsides and some of the issues that we need to face. And then our second speaker is Gemma Stanyan. Gemma is a Director of Collaboration and Provider Collaboration in Lancashire and South Cumbria. And Gemma will take us through the journey in that ICS and provider collaboration and talk to us about the work that we've done, some of the good things, the challenges, warts and all. So my name's Kevin McGee, I'm chairing this session, and I'm also from Lancashire and South Cumbria, and I am Chief Executive of Lancashire Teaching Hospitals. I'd just like to nail my colours to the mast before we go any further. I am very, very much a supporter of provider collaboration and provider collaboratives. When I look across Lancashire and South Cumbria, but other parts of the country as well, when we look at some of the issues that we face, be it workforce, be it finances, be it service configurations and the like, I don't think any one organisation can deal with these issues by themselves, and therefore provider collaborations and strengthening the ways in which organisations can make collaborative decisions together and hold each other to those collaborative decisions, in my book, is absolutely the way forward. So we've got a very short session this afternoon. We've only got half an hour. So I'm not going to say any more, but I will facilitate some questions towards the end. And I'm going to hand over to Christian. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Kevin. Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah, great. Thanks very much. So I'm going to whiz through a few slides to explain, first of all, where collaboration fits into integrated care systems, and then have a look at the two types of collaboration, partnership and collaboration, and going to talk about some of the specific legislative provisions that enable collaboration and partnership. So, first of all, I'm going to have to stand over here. First of all, to say that, of course, an integrated care system itself is not a corporate body, and instead the statutory components of an integrated care system are, as I've set out there. There are really two types of components. The first of all is what I would call the statutory components. That is where the legislation provides for particular types of bodies. There's the Integrated Care Board, which is a statutory corporate body, and we've got the Integrated Care Partnership, which is a statutory joint committee. And then the policy body components of an integrated care system would be the place-based partnerships and the provider collaborations at scale, and it's really those two entities that I'm going to focus on. And in terms of a provider place-based partnership, it really is usually based on a local authority footprint with a core membership of NHS community health, GP primary care and social care. And then the other type would be the provider collaboration at scale, which is on a larger footprint, usually an ICS or even multi-ICS footprint, and its core members would be acute and mental health NHS providers. And all providers are therefore expected really to be part of at least one of those types of collaboration and partnership, if not both types of partnership and collaboration. The key legislative provisions I've set out there. I would say this about them. in many ways, the legislation is quite revolutionary in what it does, because it provides enormous flexibility in the way that providers are able to organise themselves within a collaboration and or a partnership. For example, NHS trusts and foundation trusts have never before been able to be part of joint committees, but they can now be set up joint committees in which they can fully participate, and under the terms of the legislation itself more or less puts no restriction at all on what providers can delegate to the joint committee. They can have pooled budgets, they can have other people being part of their joint committee in terms of local authorities or combined authorities. And in terms of the treatment of their delegated arrangements, the treatment of delegated arrangements means that there is no limit to the sub-delegation that can take place. So in terms of the legal framework itself really puts no brakes on what you can do by way of collaboration and partnership. Really, the brakes and limitations on what can be done are, first of all, the nervousness perhaps within an integrated care system about how far they should go, especially initially with collaboration and partnership. And secondly, in terms of NHS England policy, as I've put up there, there's statutory guidance that NHS England can produce, and the statutory guidance does put some controls and limitations on what can be delegated to one of these joint committee or shared function delegation arrangements. I'm going to whiz through those slides because I think I've covered all of them in what I've said already. I'm going to go to really emphasise this point about the treatment of delegated arrangements. Any function that is delegated becomes in effect the function of the person to whom you've delegated. So as I say, there's no limitation on the amount of sub-delegation that can take place. In terms of the actual potential models, I've outlined a few potential models that you can think of for your collaboration, and they start on the far left with alliance partnership, which is where many, I think, partnerships and collaborations already are, and they extend all the way to a new legal entity. And I think with some of the policy that's coming out of NHS England, it's assuring complex change guidance, for example, the new guidance for statutory transactions is indicative that NHS England and the Department of Health are both expecting some significant consolidation within the NHS as part of the arrangements for collaboration and partnership. So, what are my conclusions? My conclusions are you've got a very flexible legal and policy framework. The ICB itself is able to delegate to a provider. You can have joint committees, multiple levels of sub-delegation. Going forward, we're expecting the new bespoke NHS provider selection regime. So there'll be liberalisation of procurement. CMA merger review no longer applies to NHS Foundation Trust, never applied to NHS Trust, but doesn't apply to Foundation Trust. The big note of caution, of course, is all of this freedom will carry risk, and you will need to manage the risk in terms of the governance and contractual arrangements that are put in place here, because you will be sharing financial risk, quality risk, and you'll be sharing reputation risk. So all of that risk will need to be carefully managed in the way that you go forward. So at that point, I'm going to hand over to Gemma. Over to you, Gemma.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Great, thanks. Just that one, yeah?
Should take it forward.
Okay, great. Lovely. Okay, so following on from Christian, I'm going to take you on a very, very quick whistle-stop tour of a bit more practical background and history and moving on through COVID into what we're now doing going forward in our provider collaborative across Lancs and South Cumbria. And this is a sort of a graphic illustration. For those of you who don't know Lancs and South Cumbria, it's very, very sort of urban in terms of Preston and Blackburn, and you've got lots of wealth sitting next to lots of poverty. It's got Blackpool, it's one of the most deprived areas in the country, right up to Morecambe and South Cumbria. So we've got all those hospitals dotted about, and then we've got our Community Mental Health, Learning Disability and Autism Trust, which spans the whole provision. So sort of northwest of here, from where we are now, just quickly sort of taking us back, 5 years ago, Kevin and the other chief execs decided that they wanted to put somebody into post to start thinking about how we were going to work at system level, given that we had a number of clinical fragile services that were no longer going to be sustainable if everybody continued to deliver them at each of the hospital sites across the patch. So that's where I came along. I was working at NHSI at the time, having moved up from London to Manchester. So I'm not going to go into detail, we'll be able to share the slides, but we've worked really, really carefully to think about our quality, our well-being of our workforce, the clinical sustainability, the financial sustainability, and then thinking about how do we really collaborate when there are so many challenges with each of the system, and also the fact that we have a new integrated care board with people finding their feet within the new system. And I'm really just going to talk about it. So when I came into post 5 years ago, we had 4 clinical programs that we were thinking about how we're going to do this at system level, how we're going to start thinking about a networked approach around the sustainability of those services. Whoopsie. And those were stroke, diagnostics, head and neck services and vascular services. Those continued with some challenges really around how we were going to do this and how we were going to start addressing that organisational sovereignty and really thinking about collaboration versus competition, given that, you know, we all have worked in a competition area for so long. So that real collaboration and taking people with us has been one of the most important things. And then as we moved into the challenge of COVID with the pandemic, thinking about Kevin and I worked in the hospital cell together, chairing daily mutual aid calls. That sort of collaboration really took a massive momentum and stride forward, and I think we've really built on that as we've gone forward after the pandemic, thinking about establishing an elective recovery programme which works alongside all of our clinical transformation. So the Provider Collaboration Board, we are moving to a joint committee. We'll be doing that over the next few months, and we're working with colleagues from Browne Jacobson to do that. They're going to all the trust boards to take people through the challenges, what it means, the delegated responsibility and the issues that Christian has just talked about. But in the absence of all of that, we set up the Provider Collaboration Board with the chairs and chief execs with those 5 organisations in Lancs and South Cumbria. And underneath that, we established an architecture to try and take us forward to deliver our priorities, which was very much thinking about our clinical transformation to produce sustainability, thinking about corporate collaboration, which is very much how do we think about digital, estate, finance, HR, workforce, and all those colleagues who provide those essential services. How do we think about making that more streamlined and working at system level? And then thinking about, we set up a PCB coordination group, which is, Kevin now chairs that as the executive chief exec lead. I support him, and we have the executive professional leads from each of the professional groups. So medical director, director of nursing, COOs, finance directors, estates, everybody taking their work forward at system level and then taking the information back into their trusts. It's not perfect, it's really challenging because everybody who's doing this is doing it on top of their day jobs already. So it's really starting to, you know, as I said, bring people with us. How are we going to do these essential bits of work that we can only do at system level within that? That's pretty much a very quick whistle-stop tour. Some of the challenges I would say very briefly are the organisational sovereignty versus working at system level. How do you cross those organisational boundaries? How do you work with a new integrated care board? What's delegation of specialised commissioning going to look like? How are we going to work alongside our new hospital programme that we have? How are we going to continue to develop that elective recovery? How are we going to work with urgent and emergency care? And how are we going to work within our massive financial challenge as well? So those are, some of the dynamics that all of us are facing on a daily basis. But as I say, the other thing is that, everybody, as you'll well know, have got, really, really busy and challenging and demanding day jobs. How do we sustain the motivation? How do we sustain that culture? How do we sustain people working at system level while they're also having to battle with their day jobs and firefighting? So it's a very quick tour. I'm happy to have questions when we go into that. Also, if anybody wants to contact me afterwards and talk through what I've done over the last few years with colleagues, I'm more than happy to do that. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Gemma. So we've got about 10 minutes for some questions and answers. So if anybody's got any questions, please fire them through. But just while people are thinking, I'm going to ask Christian put you on the spot, if I may. How do you see the provider landscape developing over the next few years with this legislation, with the permissibility of the legislation and the intent of the legislation? How do you think the provider landscape, particularly about organisations, are going to change over the next few years?
I think that's a really important question. I think that one needs to, in a way, move one step back from the legislation and look at what the relationships are. Because if you don't have relationships, the legislation doesn't work. The legislation can't force you into a good relationship. What the legislation can do is to facilitate a superstructure around the relationship, and it can help with some of the processes around what Gemma was talking about in terms of the balance between organisational sovereignty and system working. Nevertheless, the policy intent is very clear that there should be system working, and that will take a change of mindset. For example, councils of governors, in my experience, have been very focused on organisation and not focused at all on the system. But the new Code of Governance and the new additional guidance produced by NHS England about governors' statutory duties is very clear that they must prioritise in many ways the system, or at least take account of the system and balance system requirements against organisation requirements. So I think that to start with is going to be the balance between organisation and system, and I think that within probably the next few years you will see much more mature provider collaboration who are doing maybe 80% of ICB commissioning activity will be done at by the provider collaboration. And provider collaboration will be the game in town. If you don't do provider collaboration, I don't think you'll be meeting what your objectives are going to be for how people want you to behave in the future.
Okay, thanks, Christian. A similar question then to Gemma, but a slightly different stance. You've been working in Lancashire and South Cumbria now for a few years. What do you think firstly has gone well? And then conversely, what do you think's not gone well, so that we can build on this for the next few years?
The things that I think have gone, that have gone well have been particularly when we have had clinically led programmes that have managed to get to a point, going through a really proper, robust process, to get to a point where we say, right, now we actually need to make the change, and that enables us to then help those who are in each of those sovereign organisations that I spoke about make that decision to say, right, we're going to need to do this differently. One of the challenges within that, though, was that with the commissioning landscape and the financial challenges and the number of competing agendas, it's been really, really difficult to be able to say, right, we are actually now going to do it. So I think a lot of the time we've sat at a bit of an edge with a decision and then have actually found it difficult to make that decision and go. But I think we've really, since the pandemic, I think we've really made a step change with that, and I think we're now saying we now have to do this. We have a massive pace for change with all the things that I spoke about before. The things that I think have been really difficult have been not just the stuff I talked about around people's day jobs, particularly in balancing system working versus their own organisational responsibilities. But I think also then the move, certainly over the last year, from provider commissioner into the new landscape, and how the challenges of that are really, what's it going to land, how are we going to bring people with us, how are we going to change the culture of that old commissioner-provider split into working together as a system. And for those of us, or those of you who've got system jobs like mine, that is one of the biggest challenges, I think, is how you really start to help and enable people to move forward and think about, yes, you do have a responsibility, as Christian was talking about, for your own organisation, but you also now have a statutory responsibility to think about people and the system, and think about making sure we're thinking about health inequalities at system level and not just in your own organisation. So I think those would be the things that stand out as the biggest highlight. And I describe myself, Kevin, as you well know, as having a United Nations role. So managing a lot of those politics is also really challenging, but also really enjoyable, actually.
Okay, thanks, Gemma. I think we've got a question from the audience.
So, recognising that, the comment was great, Gemma. I think we all have system jobs, don't we? Regardless of whether we're a provider, commissioner, or whatever. So, there's an aspect to it. I guess probably just an observation and just picking up on the technical presentation. Part of what we now need to do, regardless of the structure, which sounds like it's working really well for you, a huge part of this is about, you said, relationships. It's about people want to play, right? So, the whole, good people trump good structures, whichever way you want to look at it. There is that sort of engagement buy-in thing. So I was just curious from the legislation point of view. We had on the slide about NHSE can mandate certain things, and we said you basically we all need to play nicely in the sandbox, and hopefully we'll all get there. But invariably, we're all not going to get there at the same point. So I'm just curious as to what thoughts we think might happen in a legislative environment from NHSE that might drive system working, as opposed to the kind of just get on and do that we're doing at the moment.
My experience of change within the NHS has been that more often than not, the centre will encourage a certain type of change and will allow people to evolve and develop how they think change can be done. And for the early adopters, they're able to make progress on a model that they develop and fits them. But then for people who are following, there is often impatience from the centre, or otherwise simply people at the centre think that they should be controlling how development happens, and you then get programme paths put in place, and before you know it, you've got something as big and complex as the integrated care contract process for approving what you're going to do, and you go through business cases and all those sort of things, and you lose the ownership of what you're trying to do. So you have got this opportunity at the moment, this freedom to develop, but if you don't take it now, you won't do it, it will be done to you. So I would recommend that, on the basis of my experience, that you take the initiative, because otherwise somebody will do it to you.
Okay, thank you. So I think we're just about out of time now, looking at the guys. So I'll just leave you with one last thought, if I may. Thank you for coming along, but it's that quote, isn't it? If you think competition is hard, try collaboration. It's harder still. But you know what? It's absolutely worth it. And following what Gemma and Christian had said, I would put it to you, it's the only show in town from a provider perspective going forward. So thank you for listening.
Thank you.